Drive theory shows a linear relationship between arousal and performance, this meaning that drive theory suggests that with more pressure, the higher your performance will be. For example, drive theory would suggest that if you were playing a cup final, your arousal levels would be higher, therefore your performance will be greater than if you were playing a friendly where your arousal levels would be lower, therefore your performance would be lower. The more, pers- the more the person is aroused, the higher the performance. The habit strength was learned behavior so that under pressure they would be able to keep calm and relaxed to perform at their highest. This would explain how that when a beginner starts to play a sport, they will not play as well as experienced players, as they would not know the skills required to get them out of places where they have a lot of pressure on them and would get stuck. For example, in rugby, if a player got a ball and there wasn't a player outside him, an experienced player would be able to look up and see where he was, whereas an inexperienced player may just throw the ball away from the pressure on him. There are problems with this theory, such as highly experienced players also choke and fail to perform at their highest. By increasing arousal, performers may refer back to more dominant skill, which may be incorrect. Inverted U theory. Inverted U states that arousal improves performance up to an optimal point. Past this point, performance begins to decrease. For a performer to experience maximum contribution into their sport and play at their utmost best, then they would need moderate optimal arousal levels. If the athlete exceeds this optimal arousal, then their performance will slowly begin to deteriorate. The optimal levels vary between athletes taking part in the same task, sport, which they are experienced at, to the same athlete taking part in a different task, sport. Novices in different sports will need different levels of arousal. For example, in sports like golf, as the sport is more about precision and keeping calm, so a performer would not need higher levels of arousal. This compares to sports such as weightlifting or rugby, as performers need higher arousal levels to make the tackles and lift the weight. This is known as sport-specific arousal levels. Highly skilled individuals will also not need as high arousal levels as they already know the skills required and have practiced them so that they can get them right without having to think about it. Whereas novices require higher arousal levels so they can perform the skills needed.
For example, when taking into account the activity aspect of the inverted U theory, more experienced athletes may be highly skilled when it comes to more precise movements such as shooting a basket under pressure in basketball. However, if an athlete was to attempt to shoot a basket under pressure and they weren't highly skilled with precise movements, then they are likely to feel the pressure of the crowd, which could knock their concentration and result in their arousal levels beginning to decrease. Also, when taking into account the skill level aspect of the inverted U theory, this theory states that beginners require all of their attention to be focused on one task, so they do not cope well with over-arousal. This compares to highly skilled individuals who have the skill well practiced and so do not require such high levels of concentration. This suggests that highly skilled players may not cope well with arousal levels. For example, if a novice in netball was attempting to mark a defender and also attempting to intercept the ball, then they are less likely to complete both tasks to their best ability successfully, as they are concentrating on two different things at once. On the other hand, a highly skilled netballer would have the ability to mark the defender and make a successful intercept, as they have the skills necessary to complete both tasks. This suggests that it will take a beginner longer to reach their optimal arousal levels as opposed to a highly skilled player. Different types of personalities also will affect how much arousal is needed to perform sport and cope with the pressure. For example, extroverts can cope with the pressure a lot better than introverts cope with pressure. So extroverts will be less worried and nervous under pressure, which means their optimal arousal levels can be higher before they start to decrease in performance. Introverts, on the other hand, will have optimal arousal levels which are significantly lower, which will result in their performance decrease more quickly when less aroused. Catastrophe theory. The catastrophe theory is used within sport to explain why an athlete's performance may suddenly deteriorate and why they may become subject to a huge loss in skill level. The theory suggests that performance can be affected by arousal levels, however, only when an individual has low levels of cognitive anxiety. This theory explains that if an athlete is experiencing high levels of cognitive anxiety and then arousal levels increase up to the athlete's threshold, then the player experiences a dramatic catastrophic drop in performance. However, the arousal threshold level may be significantly different when comparing elite athletes to novices in sport. For example, a novice who has just begun playing their chosen sport will have a lower optimal arousal level than an elite sports performer. This means that the novice performer will have a lower optimal level of performance. It could also mean that the novice's catastrophe stage may be more dramatic to their performance in the sense that it could take longer for them to recover when being compared to elite athletes. Although the catastrophe theory has similarities with the inverted U theory, there is one key difference, that the drop in performance does not have to be a slight, steady decline after arousal levels have become too high or have reached the optimal stage. For example, if a netball player was in a mid-game and they attempted to make a pass to another player, but the pass was intercepted by the opposing team due to the player not concentrating, then the player who made the pass may feel responsible for the ball turnover and blame themselves. This would be the catastrophe stage in their performance. Alternatively, if the performer was becoming tired and lethargic during a game, and they have exceeded their optimal arousal levels, then their performance may deteriorate rapidly. The catastrophe theory states that it's considerably difficult to recover from this catastrophic drop in performance, and therefore this will contribute to continuing failure when participating. However, this theory states that the original level of performance can only be regained if the stress levels of the performer are substantially reduced to the point when the original performance curve was at its peak.